Welcome to 3 of 6 of the ESF webinar series. I am Leela Talbert, and this is being recorded. So if there's a moment in here that you wish you could capture that, just know that we will share the link on the SMORE and that you can access that. And after the series is over, that we are going to house these on the Region 15 website as well, and we'll be sure to let you know where those are also. But for the duration of the series, if you'd like to see the one or two, or even rewatch this one or share them, and you think there's somebody that could, this would be a useful tool, that's our hope for this is a useful tool for you. So feel free to share that SMORE and share the link, and then they can watch these webinars live, as well as access links to future webinars as well. So as we jump into it, what is 3 of 6? Well, 3 of 6 today, we're going to be focusing on high quality curriculum. If you are unsure of what ESF is, if you would watch the 8-minute video either in the SMORE or provided in a link in the email that was sent to principals, that would give you a good background of ESF. So we're working as if you understand that. If you haven't watched it or are new to this, stick with me because I think it'll still make sense to you, but I would encourage you to watch it after the webinar is over. So these are the essential actions, the 6 that you see in gold, and we're going to highlight the third. We started from the end. We started with the core and working our way backwards. So we're in our third essential action in what we call 4.1 of high quality curriculum. Well, so what is high quality curriculum? If you look at page 4 of your 6-pager, or you can look here on the screen with me, this really lays out what high quality curriculum is. So it tells us what are the key practices. As you can see here, there are 4 key practices listed under high quality curriculum. So this gives us the goal of the lever. But not only does the framework do that, it'll also tell us, well, what is the evidence we're looking for that would show that we have evidence of these practices. So for example, if I look at this first key practice, that our resources are aligned to the standards. They include a scope and sequence units with formative assessments aligned to state assessments for all tested subjects and grade areas. And so as we keep looking there, then what does this look like? So as we go across the success criteria, well, it shows that we are aligned to the TEKS with an emphasis on readiness standards. Okay, so it just gives a little more detail. Second bullet, it's structured and logically sequenced units of instructions, backwards planned from formative assessment. So in other words, we know what our assessment is prior to planning our unit. So that's the backwards planning. Also, it includes dedicated time for assessment as well as reteaching. So as we're planning out our pacing guides and laying out the unit, that we have time for teaching, assessing, and then some built-in reteaching time. So that is what's beautiful about ESF, is it really gives the nuts and bolts and details. So how I've referenced it before, it's kind of a recipe. What ingredients do you have? What do you not have? Which is something that we think can be powerful for any school. So you really layer this on and think, what do we have and what's missing? And then kind of really help us make decisions on next steps moving forward. And maybe there's practices we're doing that do not fall in this. They might be great practices. And so we're really just lasering in on high quality curriculum today. But the ESF offers other opportunities. So if there's other interests or needs you have, you can look through that 6-pager, which really is focused on the 6 foundational actions. But there's also an 8-pager that gets more into what are the district supports that could be included in that as well. Those links are all provided in your email as well as on the SMORE newsletter. So if that's something you're interested in accessing after the webinar, you could do that. So let's look at this second row right here. Now we're getting into formative assessments. Are they aligned to the state standards with the appropriate level of rigor? Are they at least administered at least 3 to 4 times per year to determine if students learned what was taught? So possibly you do a mid-year and an end of year, or beginning and mid, but you do not have anything in the interim. So this really gives us that at a minimum, we want 3 to 4 times a year. But with that, not just to assess, is there time for corrective instruction that's built into the scope and sequence? So now what does that look like? What would our evidence say that would provide evidence of that? So are they administered? Cumulative in nature? Are they common? So are they designed with the intent to be delivered across all grade level content classrooms? Are they aligned? Do they address the standards with the same prioritization as the state assessments? Does it address the standards as rigorously as the state assessment? And does it reflect the format and type of questions? So essentially, we want students to be practicing like they would be expected to perform at the end. So we go to the third row, instructional materials with key ideas. So what are the essential questions, recommended materials, content-rich text used across classrooms? So what does this look like? Well, instructional materials are provided for each content area, implemented with fidelity, include specifically designed resources or accommodations to support students with disabilities and English learners, and recommended instructional materials, including content-rich text, are utilized during instruction. And do students have access to them? So maybe not just do we have them, but do students access them also? And then last, on the final row, do campuses implement high fidelity professional development calendars for teachers that provide introductory and ongoing content focused job embedded training? So as we're getting these curricular resources, are we training our people into what they are, how to access them, but also supporting them in the implementation of that? So the evidence would be, do our campus calendars reflect that? And also, another evidence would be our PLC agendas. Is there included time to make connections between data analysis, reteach plans, to appropriate instructional materials? So as we move forward, and really our thought for any level of campus that you're on and any performance that you're performing at is really how to take this success criteria and really layer on the lens of how is my campus doing. So one of the really neat things about ESF is it provides exemplars. So maybe you don't know what that would look like. There's an exemplar packet, so the things in the exemplar packet that you can reference. So this is one example. It just shows a 5th grade math. So this example in the exemplar packet really walks through a 5th grade math scenario showing the components that are provided in the success criteria. So it's standards focused on readiness standards. As I keep going, now there's a scope and sequence, so you can see when each standard is taught and what units and how frequently they will be taught over the year. But with that, there's also a pacing guide. So in order, if you see weeks 1, 2, 3, 4 on the left hand and what units we would be on and what standards those would be in. Also, one of the examples here is you can see that there's some professional development built in. This is not my campus. I can't really speak to what that professional development is on, but I can see that it's scheduled in. And they've also scheduled in benchmark testing. So we know that that's coming, and then professional development opportunities as well. Unsure again what exactly that PD would be providing, but there's opportunity there. Now here's a benchmark that aligns in the 5th grade example. So you can see this is benchmark 1. Again, this isn't my campus. I can't really speak to what this is. It looks like a release test to me. Looks like they give this using the same resources as what students would expect at end of year and how to implement and utilize those. So they're definitely aligned. I don't know the frequency of these in this example, but it does show you an example of what could be used. Also, it gives the answer key and then broken down. So this actually tells you right here the source the questions came from. In that exemplar response, what type of question, and then what standard it is. Then over here, you can see the breakdown by standard and how many questions. So if we wanted to check the frequency of them, and if that aligns, as that's part of the success criteria, with end of year assessments, then we could check that as well by looking there. So as we layer on the lens of the success criteria, these examples are very heavy in the first 2 rows. They really show us some great examples of what this could look like. Again, there's no right way. Every campus is unique and district is unique. And so what fits, it's really are these components in there is what we're looking for. But if we look at these bottom 2 rows, there's really in the exemplar packet, there is lagging evidence of this. So what are your instructional materials, which are something you would really have to dig into? Are they implemented with fidelity? And then at the bottom, do your campus calendar. So we saw in the pacing guide, it did show evidence that they had some PLC, or not PLC, but PD opportunities built into their schedules. And is that built into our plans in the same level of sophistication? So if we speak to campuses, this is a campus that I was a principal at, so as I take this campus in mind and layer on the lens of 4.1 and looking at high quality curriculum and really thinking through those success criteria, it really for us was about a 3-year phase in. So in year 1, that really we had to do some systems calibration. So really had to explicitly state expectations for planning. So backwards planning, that was really something I think that had been heard but not visited in a while. So just revisiting that, ensuring that all staff could access. We use Teach Resource System for our scope and sequence, but ensuring that all teachers had access to that, it could understand their standards. And then ample opportunity to teach and learn. So really looking at master schedule and thinking through for Tier 1 instruction, did they have opportunity to do that and respond to Tier 1 learning? But then even extending that and thinking through, did they have opportunity in the day or extended day to respond to struggling learners? So thinking in a Tier 2 component. With that, we were aligning our PLCs. It really was a campus mission of aiming at student progress first and standards alignment along the way as well. And so incorporating this focus on the high quality curriculum and standards within our weekly PLC times as well. Then year 2, we really progressed to submitting lesson plans electronically, which required some training. We utilized Eduphoria. I've heard lots of people are utilizing Google. Again, there's not a right way. It just depends on your resources and accessibility and knowledge. But really, at the end of the day, what our success criteria is saying is that ensure that your people understand and are supported in whatever you choose to do that. So really focused on standards-based teaching, identifying standards, and then what we called framing the lesson, which is a fundamental 5 term. It could be a learning objective, exit ticket, we will, I can. It just depends on what your common language is for your school, but really putting on, if I'm using success criteria to evaluate where we were as a campus and next steps, these were our practices. Year 3, we really aligned our unit assessments. Teachers created them, and then we reviewed them prior to unit planning. Teachers taught units, then they administered, and then responded to that data. So if I pull out and think of what are the systems, because this is a systems-focused plan is what ESF is, what are the systems that we really looked at? Well, calendaring was a huge one of those that I feel like has impacted every one of these levers so far. And so if I pull out a kind of 3 months of that and what does that look like? Well, when we're honing in on this and looking at this calendar in the webinar 2 of 6, I go in more depth on our calendar, so I'm not going to do that today. But what I wanted to hone in to here is part of the success criteria for 4.1 is, do we have time to respond to those assessments? And this one right here is what we called our data dig days. Our teachers rotated into us through what we called college block, which was our RTI time. And our teaching assistants were amazing at covering those times with students so that teachers could come in here and look at assessments and plan accordingly. Then we had some celebration time, what we called show time, that would celebrate student progress. And then this was our SIT meeting days, or student intervention team, that we would pull in parents, because if our data is showing that we are flatlining and we are responding to that data and it's still not, we wanted to ensure parents were aware and bring them into the fold as well to see if they had any solutions, with the intent of exiting students from that process. So our goal was that they would make progress. Also looking at our schedules, master schedules, which I referred to a while ago, ensuring there was ample time and opportunity to teach the content expected. Including unit planning and alignment in our PLC. So this was a part of our PLC form that was submitted on a weekly basis, was discussing standards and their lesson frames. When we started, in order to calibrate on standards, one of my favorite resources that we used, and I wanted to share, Leads Forward's resources. They're free, and one of my favorite ones right here is what's in the snapshot. And I pulled out a kindergarten example, but if you scroll down and you go to their page, and if you just Google Lead Forward, it'll take you right to it. And go to Resources, which is right here on their tab, Snapshot. So this is what it looks like, but it pulls out, my favorite thing is the color coding they do, and it really essentially creates a one-pager. So for example, this is kindergarten. I copied these front to back in color for teachers. So the green shows them the readiness standards, the yellow shows them the supporting standards. They also see their process standards as they go across the top here. If it is a tested grade, it also includes a column, which isn't in this one since this is kindergarten, but it includes a column that shows the blueprint as well. So they can actually see how many questions are tested per strand. And it's all on one sheet. So this is really a great tool for teachers to use as a quick access as they're making decisions and studying, and whether they're learning standards, or maybe they've even just changed grade level and they're having to learn new standards. So it really just depends on where they are, but this is a great resource to provide any teacher at the beginning of the year, and just really a quick access to standards. One of the things I didn't have the opportunity to use yet, but I wanted to make you aware that on the TEA website, they're doing this Texas Resource Review, or what they're going to call TRR. It is set to launch this fall, but it's essentially they're setting it up like a consumer report for instructional materials. And so if you are wanting to access, or you are wondering about specific resources to purchase, or that you're using for your campus, this will be a place that you could go in order to get consumer reports on for instructional resources. I think it's a phenomenal idea. I expect great things with it, and really just wanted to make you aware, because it's one of the struggles we had, is really how to review resources, because we know it's not about the program, it's about the people, but wanting to ensure that our people were equipped with great resources and tools in order to implement and teach the standards. So as we're creating formative assessments and really trying to align our practices in that, as you saw in the success criteria, one of the things is to align to the frequency of what end of year would look like. So one of my other favorite resources for doing that, again, under resources and lead forward, but if you go to a different tab, it's right here on data tools. It's this frequency distribution by student expectation. And when you click on that, it'll show you how many, so whichever content you're needing it for, it'll show you how many times every standard was tested in that grade. And so as you're building unit assessments, you can really kind of correlate. For example, it'll show you what percentage of supporting standards were, the readiness standards. And so as I'm building unit assessments, I would want my unit assessments to be proportional to that. So as admin, when we reviewed the test, essentially we did two things. We took the test and would help with any editing that was needed. For example, sometimes a question would lie on one page and the graph might end up on the back page. And so that just makes it challenging to take the assessment. So we would point that out. But the other thing we looked at was the frequency distribution of the standards. So did they align with what frequency distributions on assessments look like? And that essentially was our feedback. And then we just supported teachers in any other wonders or questions that they would have as well. So when I layer on the lens of success criteria, thinking about our practices and possibly what are high leverage things we want to ensure to keep, and then what could be next steps for us and what that could be. So I would take this to leadership team with this lens on of these are our current practices, and they know because they're living it with me, and then thinking through what could our next steps be. Well, when I look through the success criteria layered on what I just shared with you as our practices, I start seeing some gaps. So for example, we did have a PLC agenda, but honestly, our PLC agenda did not include time to make connections between data analysis, reteach plans, and appropriate instructional materials. Now, did our teachers talk about data, instructional materials? Yes. Reteach how to do it? Yes. But our PLC agenda did not include that in there. So that's something that I would take to leadership team, and then we could really process through that and what could that look like for us. Another thing, if I look at the success criteria, I really looked at if I were to look at our standards and say, did our standards scope and sequence, did we include a dedicated time for assessment? We did. But reteaching, well, it depends on how we look at that. So I have this dashed line around it to say, I'd really have to visit with my leadership team about it. Could that be built in, and was it systematic? I know that some of my teachers absolutely built reteaching into that. Was it systematically an expectation? I cannot say it was. I never stated that overtly. And so could that be included? It could. We also had what I shared as college block time, which is our RTI services. There could be reteach in there. We had a lot of kids pulled out for different services. Our teachers were providing small group at that time as well and really doing some tier 2. So probably not the best reteaching opportunity, because there would have been lots of kids that they missed there. But if it's a small group that needed a reteach and they could, that would be good. So that's really dashed. We'd have to process through that of what does that look like for us. And then really the other thing is I look at this Does our campus calendar indicate dedicated time for job-embedded professional development focused on curricular resources? I would say we did a really good job of this. We had at the beginning of the year, but the ongoing support from year in and year out, it really fluctuated depending on what was happening. So our counselor last year, we were doing some new ELAR resources, and she scheduled in some support from that company to come in and support some of those resources, which was phenomenal, which was embedded and it was on the go as well as she supported that. We did some ELA and math meetings at the beginning of the year, always looking at resources and reminding that we plan with standards, create assessments first, and then going for there. But I dashed around this because I don't know that necessarily we tried to be strategic, but this really varied year by year and something that I would want to keep on the front burner and look at every year with leadership team. So for example, this year that we're in a new ELA adoption and implementation. And so what does that look like for you for this year? And so was there any training on resources prior? If not, it's an absolute need now. But if so, then what does that support look like in week 7, 6, 8, wherever you are at school in the school year, and just supporting that implementation. So thank you for joining me. Hope that you've got a glimpse of what this could look like. Again, I would encourage you to take that success criteria, think of your campus's practices, implementation thus far. If you have a leadership team or somebody that you plan with, and take it, what does that look like for you this year? But maybe even thinking through next year, what does this look like for you next year? It definitely requires a growth mindset, but remember, Craig Groeschel always says that we would always rather follow a leader who's always real rather than one who's always right. So again, thanks for joining me. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, call, or text. My cell's on there as well. And be sure you join us next Thursday on the 8th at 1 for Positive School Culture. In my opinion, it's one of the biggest 3 rocks in this ESF webinar series, and I would sure encourage you to join in if at all possible. But if not, it will be recorded